Hi, welcome back to Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans.
And I'm Robert Winters.
And we will continue.
Onward and upward.
Yeah, but
right.
Particularly on this growth policy document that you want to bring up.
So,
okay.
It's...
Give us some little background on this, or why this
okay,
is
so there's
to you.
I guess it's sort of been a kind of a recurring theme over the last few weeks with us is this Envision Cambridge process is wrapping up.
Right.
Let's not quite say wrapping up. It's not quite there.
No, it's not. But there's a lot of emphasis on housing.
Right.
And
but they're promising a kind of a report by December, which is not that far away.
A draft report, not
draft
a final
report.
Yeah.
And also now some of the recommendations from working groups have been farmed out to various city council committees.
Has that happened?
Several of them have already been scheduled.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think one maybe with urban form.
Oh yeah, you're right. They have been. I have them all
planning,
written down. Yeah.
And the early
through
ones
November and December.
Yeah, some of the environment-related ones are going to Environment and Health Committee.
Okay.
So anyway, so we're kind of in the middle of it now, right? There's also been some controversies. We won't go into great length about it this week. With this overlay proposal and super inclusionary proposal, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Anyway, there was at your suggestion, I watched a planning board meeting
from September 25th. Yeah.
Which had to do with that overlay district.
Right. There was another presentation by community development to the planning board.
And in it, it was Hugh Russell had mentioned, he started quoting particular things that were part of the city's Cambridge's growth policy. Now, again, the brief background is that in around 1992, there was a series of meetings. I only got to maybe one or two of them myself. I guess I wasn't really invited, but anybody could have gone. But it was in the height of all the talk about parking freezes and other things.
Rent control was still in effect,
rent control was
right?
still in place, which is the reason why the whole thing had to be a bit updated some years later.
Right.
So,
right.
So back in 1993, they passed what stood as a draft version of what they called Toward a Sustainable Future Cambridge's Growth Policy document. Right? And it was always curious to me that it always said draft, and years past it always said draft. But then eventually they said, no, it's not really a draft. This is the policies. But for the longest time, when the planning board would issue a special permit, they would quote specific policies from the growth policy document. According to policy number 34, such and such, to justify why they were acting in the way they were. So they were being guided very substantially.
And you said there's 70 policies?
That's 70.
Wow.
So, again, what drove the decision to have this growth policy document in the first place is probably important. There was a lot of political movement toward limiting growth, specifically commercial development at the time, politically. There was also the concern that we needed to grow tax base and that there were some issues over the parking freeze that might have completely chopped off the capacity to do that at all. So that needed to be addressed. So anyway, there are some underlying reasons why we had to develop this whole big policy document, but we did. And in fact, if you look at the specifics, we'll switch that in a second here, you'll actually see the core basis for a lot of policies that the city's been actually engaging in for the last 20-25 years. So that's where you see a lot of focus on alternate transportation modes, promotion of bicycling, promotion of pedestrian environment, things that, maybe in a generation earlier we would have said, we need to make the roads wider to get those cars through. And this was very much a departure from that. All right. But there were other things about preservation of urban form, scale, and density, and whatever happens in the future, you shouldn't just sort of run roughshod over the past. So a lot of these things were distilled into these policies. Now I'm just going to switch over to some of these things here, right now. I mean, it's kind of impossible to sort of read all of these here.
And by the way, if you go to Robert's website, this is just the text, but you can actually see he has the full thing in color and stuff, so you can see it.
Yeah, there's a report. There's a link to the on the CDD website that actually shows the full report.
But you also have it.
Back here, right?
Yeah.
that basically has a lot of images to go along
Right.
with this, a lot of narrative to go along with it. But
Right.
then there's just the policies themselves, which are basically just listed in the
yeah.
margins. All right. So I just wanted to put them into a single place because I don't
Yeah.
remember that I had ever done that before.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, so that was back around 1993 that came out. I think the fact that it was called toward a sustainable future was sort of in recognition of there was a big talk at the time about sustainability.
Yeah, well, that's when, recycling division got, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things were happening
Yeah,
around
so
that, yeah.
so things were in their
Clinton
formative
came in
stages.
was president,
Yeah, that's right. So those were the times. Now, planning documents, master plans are not carved in stone. Things change, times change, priorities change. One big, as you point out, the biggest
rent
change
control
was in
was
1994,
voted down,
question 9, out with rent control. By 95 through 97, it was being fully implemented.
Yeah,
So there was one big switch, which was that they wanted to basically promote housing growth, and to a degree, because the Affordable Housing Trust had been established, to also ensure that some adequate supply of subsidized housing was also being promoted as part of the city's policies.
so why did it take 14 years, though, to update it? Considering that
I think basically, first off, it was a draft.
Oh,
so,
okay. So maybe there were little changes being made?
But what happened
or-
is, I think, so there were a lot of city council activity in the late 90s that were acknowledging the need to sort of do some growth in housing.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea was, and it's still been largely implemented, in that there were former industrial areas, North Point, University Park area,
Kendall.
Alewife,
Alewife,
Quadrangle, Triangle, where in fact, if there was going to be growth, they said, well, let's make it as a
Yeah.
right that you can build housing in places where previously you couldn't put housing.
Oh, right, with big emphasis on that, in
Yeah.
that whole housing section.
Yeah,
Right,
so if you
yes.
look at it, the original plans for University Park were actually modified, and I think they popped another 600 units of housing or something like that in there. I could be wrong on the numbers. North Point was basically the old railroad yards, developing a lot of housing going up in there.
Right.
Out in the Quadrangle,
Right.
no, excuse me, the
triangle,
Triangle,
right.
by Alewife, a lot of housing going up. In
Yeah,
fact,
and there's photos of this if you go to the document,
yeah.
which is interesting.
So by the time you're getting around the early
Yeah.
2000s, there was a promotion of housing, and they passed the Concord Alewife plan, and that had a lot of housing, anticipated as part of that plan. And then it happened a lot faster.
Then they thought,
than
that's
they
why all
thought.
those big
And that's where people said, we need a master plan, and
I
that's
see, that
and
makes
that's
sense
kind
now,
of where
okay.
Envision came from. It was the rapid growth of housing and what some
But that was because of the updated version. That's happened, a lot of what you just said was because of the updated version. 'Cause I looked at that
Well, actually,
version.
it's the Concord Alewife rezoning that basically said, let's encourage
Right.
some housing out there.
Right, okay.
The growth policy document updates were really just more of an acknowledgement of the fact of what was. So it wasn't like those were zoning changes.
No,
right?
but it did.
It's just to say, these are our current set of beliefs.
Right, but it showed a
Right.
lot of the developments that were happening then.
Yeah, so if you look
So,
at the
yeah.
current version, you actually see a lot of updated
Right.
images that sort of show,
Right.
what
That's what I meant,
the city's
yeah.
thinking was. Now, based on what Hugh Russell had said at this planning board meeting, I thought to myself,
About the new proposal.
yeah,
or
so,
whatever
all
it
right,
is.
so now Envision Cambridge process is wrapping up its third year, really 4 if you count in
Yeah.
the continuing, the Cambridge conversations lead up to it, before they chose the UTL facilitators for this. So they came up with this 175 recommendations, some of which have to do with zoning, some of which are not. And Hugh had said, well, these proposals, specifically that overlay proposal or the super inclusionary, does this go against some of the growth policies that we established and we've been using successfully for a quarter century now?
Yeah,
Now maybe they should change things. Maybe it's appropriate,
Yeah.
right? But it occurred to me, actually, it was the last night of this morning, I said, I'm on the Envision Cambridge Advisory
and it was
Committee.
never brought up.
I said, wow, nobody ever said, hey, everybody, here's your homework assignment. Why don't you go review those 70 policies and make a list of which ones should be changed and which ones should be preserved? Because Hugh's point, I think, was that one of those proposals having to do with subsidized housing
Yeah.
was flatly contradicting multiple policies that are established in the growth policy document. So the question is, so are we saying that somehow they're no longer valid or should no longer be valid? In other words, things like preserving scale and scale and density of existing sort of stable residential neighborhoods, right? Because it certainly appears that now there's this kind of new desire amongst some quarters to basically upset the apple cart and say, for whatever reason, I won't judge, but and I thought, well, that's an interesting thing to think about. So I really think that anybody who's got any interest in Envision Cambridge should go buy themselves a coffee and sit down, or a beer, and go through the policies that have been in place for 25 years and say, good, bad, modify, change, throw out, what do you think? Right? Because I'm kind of getting of the opinion that, in fact, there was actually some pretty good wisdom shown 25 years ago, maybe even more so than we're getting currently out of this exercise.
It's 146 pages, so it is
the
quite
whole
a
thing
document.
is 146 pages, but I, as I say, if you just want to read the policies, you can just read the 70
but it is
policies.
nice to look at the places they refer
absolutely
to. So
think
I like
so.
the color, but anyway.
No, so do I. So, so anyway, I think that's something people should do. I really do.
A little late in the game, but hey, why not? So wait, so you went to a housing meeting last night of Envision?
Okay, so we could say a thing or two about that. Okay. So, there's been a certain amount of controversy stirred up over a couple of these, 100% affordable housing overlay and this super inclusionary. Okay, well, let's not get into the specifics of all of those, but it was certainly the housing working group of Envision Cambridge that was charged with, though not exclusively, this was originally, let's be clear, that the idea about this overlay came out of the city council probably 4 years ago.
Right, Denise Simmons.
And then somehow it got sort of put into the lap of Envision process, and then the group who was forwarding it was this housing working group, which is about 99%, no, can't be 99%, but 95% sort of people in this sort of the affordable housing production business. So it was going to shock nobody what their recommendations were going to be. But I actually found myself raising real questions. So I guess I'm sort of the bad boy of the committee. Because I'm on that committee. So we thought I thought was going to be the last meeting, and then they said, okay, 2 weeks later we're going to have another meeting. So I went to that last night, and it was interesting, and some of it was constructive.
Was it well attended, at least?
It was much more well attended than all the other meetings that I think I can even remember.
That you probably have said that they weren't showing up.
So that was helpful, right? And there was some good city staff. Cliff Cook was there, who was he does a lot of the data.
There's a lot of public there this time, or no?
Not too much public, no. So I spoke my piece about some of the recommendations that they have as targets, and why I disagree with some of them, strongly disagree with some of them. My biggest disagreement is that there seems to be almost an ideology at work here that says that the only way in which affordability will ever be achieved in Cambridge is by basically regulating the housing stock and basically, having subsidized housing. And I said, I think there's absolutely a place for it. There'll always be a place for public housing and whatever. But the notion that somehow you're going to provide the attractive option for middle income earners by saying, here, why don't you apply to the city and live in public housing? I'm sorry, that's just, anybody who believes that doesn't have a clue about middle-income people. Middle-income people have a little bit of money, maybe they're not rich, but they have choices and they want choices. So if you give them a choice between buying in, maybe one thing if it's a short-term thing, but if you're saying, look, here, we want you to basically buy into some subsidized housing thing in Cambridge where you don't build up any equity at all, or you could move to Medford or Watertown and get yourself a better piece of property at cheaper costs
that you can then
so what happens
appreciate in time.
so that's what happens. So middle income people are going to do that. That's what they've always done. Once upon a time they found another place in Cambridge. In fact, many of those middle income people
bought multifamily.
let's just say they were born like Louis Di Pasquale, right? City manager. He born in East Cambridge. Not uncommon that somebody who's born and raised in East Cambridge, they start to become a little more successful. Say, where do I want to go? I still want to live in Cambridge, so they moved out to North Cambridge. You know, they found a place up in Strawberry Hill or up in Cambridge Highlands.
But that was when you could do that.
That's when you can do that. So I'm, you know, and all, or what you did if you were a working class person,
You bought a two-family
or
or
a
a
three-family,
three-family.
and you worked
And then
it,
you have an income.
and then you had some income to help you cover your costs.
That's
So
hard to do now,
It's
too.
hard to, so
When you have
nobody's saying it
$1 million
is
houses. I
right.
mean,
So
it's-
nobody's saying that it's easy to do that
Right.
that way. But the truth is, so as a result, middle income people saying, well, I can't afford to do it, so I have to go to Watertown, or I have to move to Belmont, or
Belmont,
whatever.
it's
Well,
expensive.
yeah,
I know
actually,
what
well,
you- yeah.
they get the big shock of their life when they get
Yeah,
the
right.
Belmont tax bill and they realize, my
Yeah.
God, we had it so good in Cambridge, right?
Well, unless you're not owner occupied. I'm just trying
Right.
to-
So anyway, I raised some issues that, because my personal opinion is that most of their recommendations are doing nothing. I mean, really nothing for middle income earners.
I agree.
Yeah. And though I won't read it here, I actually read a quote. I was cleaning up
Yeah.
in my house old city council materials, and I found a communication from the one and only Patrick Barrett.
Yeah.
Had to do with during the inclusionary zoning when they were doing those revisions, where he just made absolutely abundantly clear. He says that market rate housing is where middle income people are going to find their affordability, even if it's tough to do in Cambridge. That's because that's what they want. They want to build up some equity in their property. So that's still what they're so somehow you have to find a way of having non-regulated housing and still provide opportunities. Whether they're all in Cambridge, they might be nearby, whatever, for middle-income people.
But how could the city actually do that?
Well, first off, I
Without
don't think.
having a
Well, another-
income limits and stuff.
Well, one of my biggest disappointments in Envision was that early on, some of us were absolutely adamant that we have to sort of work more regionally. We even suggested, I know I certainly suggested, that we should actually have a joint meeting with Somerville's Vision, or they're doing some rezoning in Somerville, City of Boston. We have like a joint
Yeah.
of these three core communities
Yeah.
or more, where we sort of say, well, what's happening? Now, completely separate from Envision, bless their hearts. The mayors, they had a thing where they actually agreed to up housing production regionally. But I said early on, and I still believe this firmly, the best way you provide market affordability in Cambridge is by giving people options all around. So, and I've specifically said, if they build, as they will, thousands of units of housing in Union Square, Somerville, or, over where the new Green Line extension will go, whatever, then there are people who are looking and somebody says, I want $5,000 for this, up rent here in Cambridge, and they go, well, why should I do that when I can go over there, be right on the Green Line in Union Square,
Will it
and
be
do
cheaper,
something?
though?
I don't know if it'll be cheaper, but the thing is that you also, and this is one of the other things, and I've said this multiple times at this meeting last night, everybody in this committee, not to toot my own horn, but I think I'm the only one who's thinking in 10-year and 20-year scales, envisioning the future, the long future.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, if you don't build the housing units today, then there won't be those units 20 years from now, which are no longer as expensive as they were when they were first built. You got to get them in the ground. So the thing is don't get too distracted by how expensive things are when something first comes on the market. You need to build up the market.
Right. Well, I guess it's, are you talking about condos, or are you talking about rentals?
Both.
See,
Both,
that's
really.
really the issue.
Yeah. I mean, the thing
Yeah.
is that for the, when I moved into my house in Cambridge, that was a house that was built in 1912. I don't know whether it was considered affordable when somebody first
But
moved in
again,
1912.
comparing when you bought your house,
I
a
know,
lot
no,
of people,
No, but the thing is
yeah.
that when you build something brand new,
Sure,
that's probably not the standard you should use for affordability.
true.
But the thing is,
Although-
as buildings age,
Yeah.
and yes, there's maintenance costs, whatever, but the thing is that there are a lot of buildings who've been around for a while, and that's actually where a lot of the affordability in the market housing existed for years and years and years. Certainly under rent control, and not just because of rent control.
Yeah.
It's just that
I mean, a lot of apartments and rentals were turned into condos with the condo law, so.
That's another, I think that was a huge
Especially along
policy.
Mass Ave, between Harvard and Porter Square, all those.
To me, one of the
units on
biggest
left.
policy mistakes
Yeah, the whole
Cambridge
condo
made
thing,
in the
yeah.
last 20 years was that if they had put at least some limitation on condo
Yeah.
conversions so that there
Yeah.
were at least multi-family opportunities, and if you could have petitioned the state to allow for the residential exemption
Yeah.
to work very effectively so that in fact there was an incentive for the small property owners to be owning those as opposed to the investors to come
Yeah,
to own them all.
right, and then they get a residential
Then you
exemption.
could have
Yeah.
retained a middle class in this city. They just basically just kicked the middle class right out of the city by not doing things like that.
Well,
Yeah.
they didn't, let's face it, they did not tweak the rent control laws, and that's why it went to a statewide referendum. They could have
That's
done
really
something
true.
then, and
You know,
they
it-
didn't because they took it for granted. We have our constituency, we're always gonna get voted in, and guess
Yeah.
what? It went to a statewide
That's right.
referendum, and other
So-
people decided it.
Yep.
So,
That's right. That's right.
do
But-
something next time.
Right, but I'm not.
know?
I am simply not satisfied with
Yeah.
the sort of the current mindset that
I
says
know,
that
we need more and more and more and
that
more
it
and
has
more,
to
yeah.
be. So from now on, the only way any affordability is to be achieved is by basically applying to a city agency to what's effectively
Right.
scattered site public housing.
Right.
To me that doesn't address. It certainly doesn't do a thing for middle income earners.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's some buying, I mean, you have the issue about limited equity, but you know what? If you still can get something nice and stay in Cambridge, you are allowed a little bit of increase, I think, if you sell it.
Little bit, yeah,
But
yeah,
it is
little bit.
keeping
But-
it for the next person.
But there's another thing too that I did, largely because I was a little, believe it or not, I was actually, I haven't got my real estate tax bill yet, though I think they were mailed out last Friday.
I
so-
know someone that got, they're really angry. It went
Yeah.
up like, it's like $800.
Yeah. So anyway, I heard that they were mailed out, and I said, "Oh, I wonder if mine will come on Saturday." Well, it didn't. Did it come on Monday? No. Maybe it'll be in the mail when I come home tonight, right? But I said, "Okay, well, let me just see," because I'm a math geek, right? I'll just sort of see if I can sort of figure out what my tax bill is
Yeah.
going to be from the assessed value, whatever.
And?
And I went and did that, and I said, well, as long as I did that, let me do it and look at the entire last 30 years and just see how
Yeah.
my assessments have changed, how the residential exemptions have changed. It's like a little study.
Yeah,
I
because
did
you're
here.
owner occupied, so you're gonna
Yeah.
have the residential exemption, right?
But the interesting thing is that for many years, even when the assessments went up, there
Yeah.
were years they went down.
Because
And-
because it's a residential exemption for you.
No.
No?
That's not the assessment. You
Oh.
you take the assessed value
Right,
and you
and then
subtract
you-
out the residential
Right.
exemption.
Okay.
I'm talking about the assessed values actually.
That went
fluctuate.
down
Oh yeah.
under-
Oh yeah.
really?
It went up some,
Oh,
then
huh.
it jumped some, and then it went down some, or
It
whatever.
didn't consistently go up?
But it's only over.
Interesting.
No, it did not.
That's
And
surprising.
well, I mean, the thing is that some of it has to do with 2-family, 3-family houses being assessed somewhat differently than
Yeah.
single-family homes, or whatever.
Yeah,
But the thing is what then happened is really over like the last decade or less, is that it just started just jumping up, right? Year after year, just dramatic increases. And I think most people who think about this understand a lot of this has to do with investors parking their money in what is seen as a stable, in a rapidly changing world, a stable place to store
'Cause
your
it
money.
never goes down,
Right.
really.
And this actually related to something I brought up at this housing committee. Nobody else talked about vacancy rate. I brought up vacancy
Oh,
rate.
right, yeah.
Because, affordability of housing is always discussed in conjunction with vacancy rate. This housing working group never uttered the phrase.
Well, do we have a vacancy rate?
It's pretty
probably
low. It's sort of
zero,
in around,
no?
it's around 3% according to Cliff Cook right now. But to get an actual dynamic market, it's got to be up at like 5 or so. But I said, but now let's think about it. Is the vacancy rate really 3% in Cambridge? Or is it higher? I say that it's higher because there are a lot of properties that are newly built where they were holding their units back from the market because they wanted to fix the prices to some degree. And also, there are investors who have properties where, in fact, the income month to month is not really the issue. It's the storage of the money just by
So
having
you
the properties.
think there's some empty new units out there? Or
I
do you know that
know
for a
that-
fact? Oh,
I
you
can look
go-
around,
Okay. How
and
do
I
you
actually-
know? You look in the windows? I
Just
mean,
look in the windows.
Oh, come on. They're
If
high rises.
if the lights are never on, then there's nobody
They're
living there.
working at Google all day and night.
So
I don't
Cliff
know.
Cook says, well, I don't know. We don't really. It's a very hard question. We do
Yeah.
believe it's higher, but it's kind of hard to get at. And
Huh.
I said, well, here's an idea. right? Well, I gave them two ideas.
Yeah, okay.
Why don't they think of this stuff? One is ask Eversource to ship over the electric bills.
Oh.
And if the electric bills are really low,
They're not gonna
nobody's
do that,
living
number
there.
one.
Right, they're
Yeah,
not going to do that.
yeah.
The other thing is, I actually have the street listings for the city of Cambridge going back 20 years,
Huh.
right? And I've got them on a computer. I don't know that I have necessarily the database skills to extract it, but you could actually ask questions like continuous occupancy. I mean, this is a related question about tenure of
Yeah.
occupancy in the city.
Okay.
Well, you could actually figure that out from the street listings if you wanted to.
That's
You know?
a lot of work.
No, actually, let the
No?
computers do the work. It's all about how you write the question.
It's how you write the program.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is knowable. It is
Okay.
absolutely knowable.
All things are knowable.
But the thing is that I think, and I know in my neighborhood there are more than a few apartment units that are just sitting there because they could rent it and maybe they eventually will. But the thing is that there's no real.
They've parked
push
their
for it.
money and they don't really need to have the rental.
Yeah,
insurance,
so we
what
can
you're
talk
saying.
about,
Yeah.
there's a goal from this housing group to produce another
Yeah.
12,500 units of housing,
Yeah.
okay? And to that I always ask, and Dennis Carlone asks, well, what's your target population? What do you
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
the
How many
population of
schools you want?
Cambridge
Yeah,
to be? How many
exactly.
schools do you
Yeah.
want?
Yeah.
Tell me about this, right?
Well, is it going to be people
Right.
with kids anyway?
Right.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if you're producing housing units, but the thing is you're not occupying the housing units,
Yeah.
then you're not really addressing things.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I just think there's a lot to be
Yep.
desired in what's coming out of this.
Yes.
You know.
Okay. Well,
so.
you certainly threw a lot out there that they need to look
Yeah,
at.
yeah. Anyway, I was going to talk a little bit more about some Central
Ah.
Square, but hey,
Maybe next week.
maybe
I
next
won't be
week.
here next week, but hopefully.
We
either
may
you
or may not be
Right.
here next week. We'll see.
And
we
if
get somebody
Robert's
else.
here, that means someone else is sitting in my place.
Yeah, but we did have our first Formula Business case
Oh,
for Central Square. It's
Amazon. little
And
A
and they're-
versus a big A.
Exactly,
Whichever, yeah.
and now that's actually going to the planning board tonight,
Oh.
right? So
Are you
I
gonna
might
go to
I
that?
might go there just
Oh,
to
that'd be curious.
basically
Yeah.
clarify something. We'll have to see about that.
Maybe Jeff will be there. He was in town. Jeff Bezos was in
I
town over the
know,
weekend.
I
Maybe he'll
know.
be at the planning
So
board
are we
meeting.
going to become
Yeah.
Amazon headquarters number
Nah,
2?
Who knows? I hope
My
not.
God, we're a world champion city.
I don't want to.
See you soon
All
on
right,
Cambridge
bye-bye.
Inside Out.